We're all right. We have to end 12:30 because I got lunch plans.
Of course you do. All right. All right. Well, so we're good to go. So Jeff, I mean, your sermon yesterday was, tell us a little about the thinking behind that. And we had a question early on, like from outside, saying, what is there a purpose to the order in Advent? You know, we talk about hope and peace and love. Was that established a long time ago? Is that something that is pretty arbitrary that you decided? Why are we doing them in the order that we're doing them?
Well, I think most Christian traditions, so you have like Eastern Orthodox, you have the Roman Catholic Church, you have Protestantism, and then within those, it depends on how liturgical your kind of tradition is. So like Roman Catholicism, very liturgical. Presbyterians, kind of liturgical. Let's say Pentecostal churches, not very liturgical, at least in the historic sense that we would say. So usually we culminate, it goes peace, hope, joy, love. And we culminate with love as the fourth Sunday of Advent, the closest to Christmas Eve, because that's the heart of the message of Advent and Christmas, that God so loved the world that he sent his only son. And this year, and now in individual congregations, oftentimes you'll have kind of local rules or local preferences. And that's kind of what I chose to do this year. I just feel like it's been a really rough couple of years. I felt really, there's been a lot of bummer stuff happening for folks. And I thought it'd be appropriate to kind of culminate with joy this year. And so I flipped love and joy around. So we did love yesterday and we'll do joy this coming Sunday. But then also, I know there are some churches, some traditions that culminate with peace, that Jesus is the Prince of Peace.
Peace, yeah.
And so it's kind of all over the place, but usually it's around those four kind of virtues or, themes.
Yeah, great. So the owl reappeared again after a couple of weeks, and you had evidence, like pictorial evidence that the owls existed. So all those doubters, that thought you were just making that up as a good sermon illustration, you have proven them wrong. But I have a question. Like, if you and Courtney are out walking in your neighborhood, one evening, who's at greater risk of being attacked by the owl? I mean, you're fairly tall, she's fairly small. Are you protecting her by walking with her, or are you running and hiding?
I think I am definitely the one who is most threatened by the owl, given my head's proximity to the sky. And honestly, the owl probably would have a much better chance of survival attacking me than attacking her.
Because she would react, or you would react to protect her?
I would do my best, but she's kind of got cat-like reflexes.
All right, okay.
And she's fairly I don't want to say aggressive, but kind of like, she's about survival.
Right. She can hold her own, is what I hear you saying. Yeah. Well. All right. So yesterday the message was based on the book of Philippians, and you mentioned the fact that Paul writes this letter to the church from prison. How critical do you think, like, where he was located as he's writing this letter and communicating this need for love? How critical do you think that is to our understanding and what it was that he was writing?
Well, as far as yesterday, I think it's pretty critical, because I think when you see him say, I've got joy, I'm giving thanks. When you see him talk about hope, or God has not finished the great work that God is up to, that he's got this sense that God is behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. And I think, when things are going right for us and our lives are well, the world's well, we don't really worry that, we don't want, oh, is God in this? No, we're like, oh, it's a God thing. It's, everything's great. But when things go poorly, when people are sick, when there is in despair, that's when we start wondering, where is God? And so I think this is helpful to see Paul in a place where he could be asking, where is God? He says, I may not know exactly how God is at work, but God has been at work in Jesus Christ, and God is working behind the scenes even now.
Yeah. So you mentioned there, the power of the ellipsis. And there's been some, I don't know if you've seen, there's been some pretty graphic images coming out of like Western Kentucky, and Mayfield, Kentucky, and all that kind of stuff. And the place is devastated. I mean, it looks like a war zone. I mean, how would you see that, understanding the ellipsis, living into the ellipsis, that it's not final? How would you encourage us to respond to people in need like that, and also them in the midst of that tragedy?
Yeah, so I think first of all, I'm always hesitant to tell anyone how they should respond to suffering or evil that occurs to them.
Right.
So I think the most important thing is to come alongside people who are suffering and sit in it with them, and not try to resolve it, not try to make it all go away or make them feel better about it. Like by saying things like, God's at work right now. Can't you tell that your house has just been, devastated, or your family, you've lost family members? That's not helpful. But it's to be there incarnationally as God has been with us in Jesus Christ. That's kind of the model. And so, in terms of RPC, I know we were just talking that in terms of those tornadoes and that devastation, we're talking about, okay, how can we help heal the brokenness? How can we provide resources, monies to go and rebuild and help folks? So I think there's both kind of the spiritual empathy and sympathy of coming alongside somebody and sitting with them, but there's also the practical, work of working to redeem and to heal the brokenness in this world.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and kind of in keeping with that, I mean, we understand intellectually that, God's love is consistent and never ending, but I don't always sense that. I'm not always experiencing that, even if I know it to be true. So what do we do in those situations when I'm not feeling love? Doesn't mean it's not there, but how do is it just blind faith? I mean,
okay, so I don't think it's blind faith. I think it's faith based on the evidence. Okay. And I think it's helpful to make a distinction between my subjective kind of feeling about God's love and the objectiveness of God's love. So outside of me. And so when somebody says, so back in the day, I used to hang out in pretty evangelical circles, and folks would ask, when did you become a Christian? When were you saved? That was when were you saved? And I kind of came to a place, where I started getting kind of cheeky about it and saying, I was saved 2,000 years ago on a hill called Golgotha. And that conviction comes from, it's not about how I feel about it, but it's objectively what happened, God intervening in human history, so that whether if I'm up or down, I can tether myself to that truth, that what God has done 2,000 years ago. So, and then subjectively, how I feel about it is, I think, at a kind of ebb and flow with what's going on in my life, how I'm feeling. And so I want to be sympathetic, very sympathetic for folks who don't feel God's love, who don't feel God's presence in their life. I want to be to how they feel, but I also want to affirm our conviction that God's acted objectively in human history. And that's what Scripture attests to in the New Testament.
Yeah.
And so that's been helpful somewhat for me, because heaven knows, and I think to have a robust prayer life, it's like no holds barred when you go to God in prayer with how you're feeling.
Right.
God, are you listening? I mean, and this is one of the reasons I love the Psalms, because the psalmists are just like, there's no censored, there's no like G-rated version. It's like they're bringing everything to the Lord. And I think a lot of us, we're hesitant or scared. We haven't been given the freedom to really be honest about where we're at. I had Dan, actually, a friend of mine, I'm looking for his book. He just sent me this guy named Kyle Strobel sent me this. This is a good book. And he would say, sometimes we tend to send our avatar to God in prayer. Our avatar is like, in social media, what you put up, the picture. And he says, God doesn't want our avatar. God really wants to be in relationship with the real me.
Right.
And that can be really scary. But that's the kind of relationship we're invited to.
Right. And it's not as if God doesn't already know the real us, but we sometimes, put on this veneer, this facade, because that's what we do in life often, when we, with other people we interact with, and we kind of keep the same distance between us and God. And that is problematic for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that in your life, how have you chosen to walk alongside of people who are needing love or understanding, or to walk alongside people in order to convey the truth of God's love in the midst of their pain?
Yeah. So, I mean, when it comes on to like the spectrum of like touchy-feely, like congregational care pastors, I'm probably not on the, I'm not, I'm not very touchy-feely, And one of the things I've really had to work on is, how can I be present to somebody, give them a hug? How do I just sit along and just be with them? As I think back in my ministry, I remember the first time I was working I was working with a lot of young adults and college students, and there was a student group at Georgia Tech, Westminster Christian Fellowship, that I was help directing at the time. And I got a call one night I think it was a Friday night. And one of the young men, his sister had died tragically in a car accident here in Atlanta. And so the students were devastated. And so I had to go down and, and we just gathered around in a circle and prayed for one another. And I just made myself available to talk and to listen. But nothing that I was going to say was going to make anybody feel better about that loss. And I think we all know that would have seemed really inappropriate, that this is just this devastation. And so I think for those of us who I'm going to call myself a talker, an overexpresser, sometimes the thing I need, the best thing I can do in a situation like that is shut up and just be with somebody and let them know we're there. And how have you experienced it?
Well, I'm probably on the other end of the spectrum. I am a little bit more touchy-feely, but I'm not the talker. That's just not my thing. So you and I fill different gaps, which is probably a good thing. That's why we're make a good team.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. Dan, I got to tell you this funny story. I don't think I've told this in a sermon. Maybe I have. I can't remember. But I had this preaching professor who's like this old African-American, like famous venerated preacher in seminary. And then the TA actually is now a professor at Howard University teaching preaching. But so the professor in class, he says, when you go to, if somebody's died and you're going to the house to sit with the family, plan out the funeral, he said, everybody's going to be crying, everybody's going to be weeping. You got to hold it together because somebody's got to not get emotional and just keep things organized and moving. Then we went into the breakout session with the TA, and the TA goes, I totally disagree with Professor. You should totally feel free to cry and come alongside the family and weep with them and be in the trenches with them. And I was like, that's really funny. That is kind of like the paradox of knowing how to operate, when to weep with those who weep and when to hold it together and maybe not. So Dan, we can both learn from each other, maybe.
There's no doubt about it.
Well, I know I definitely can learn from you.
Wow. So, I mean, we've talked about this multiple times, you know, that the last 2 years have been just really challenging. I mean, yesterday, particularly the glory of Christmas, it was amazing. It's the first time I have seen the sanctuary full. I've never seen it. And it's like, wow. And it was amazing. But again, in the midst of the kind of chaos and confusion and wondering what's happening next and thinking, oh, we're out of the pandemic and then there's another variant and, you know, masked and unmasked and in person and not in person and all that kind of stuff. How have you seen evidence of God's enduring love in the RPC community?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the commitment to the community, you know, how many people, I mean, I haven't made a big deal about this, but if you count our virtual attendance, so the people that are live streaming or watching the service later, listening to the podcast, and the in-person attendance over what we were, if you compare those numbers now to where we were 2 years ago before COVID, we're up about 25 to 30%. Okay. So, you know, because our intention, we want people to be back in person because we think we can do the best ministry in that way. But we recognize people travel, people have moved, and we want them to still find a place in their faith family. So I think the commitment people have had to this community and this church has been just magnificent, you know, and I think all along the way, we've tried to do several different cycles of where we've called everybody in the congregation, making sure hopefully we're not leaving anybody behind. Our resources, our giving has maintained, people have maintained their pledging and met their commitments. And so that's meant we haven't had to lay off anybody. We've grown and created. And I think at last count, we have 140 new members since COVID. I mean, you know, and, you know, I was telling somebody from another church that, and they just couldn't believe it. And I said, I think it was one reason early on, we decided don't let a crisis go unused. And it was like, how can this crisis be an opportunity for God to lead us in some new directions? And so, you know, our virtual worship, our live stream, how can we do ministry? I mean, my Bible study on Tuesday mornings, half the guys are on Zoom, half are in person. And I got guys in Massachusetts, South Carolina, Tennessee, North Carolina. I mean, and so that's just been, I had a guy that was vacationing in Scotland. I don't know what time he got up, but didn't want to miss the Bible study, you know, and he was in Scotland. So I think those ways have been really powerful. I think, and I think our staff has just been amazing, how they have been creative and really disciplined, getting our work done, trying to meet the needs of our congregation. And so that's been a really beautiful thing, but I think it has been really, really difficult and really hard for a lot of folks.
Yeah. So what do you hope to see going forward? I mean, we can't predict the future, but, you know, what are your visions for 2022?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, in my immediate needs, we've got our families growing here in the next couple of weeks. So that's front and center on my mind, just getting through Christmas Eve and doing that. And as I look forward, I think I don't want to regress in where we've grown virtually in our virtual ministry. How can we continue to minister to folks online at a distance? Okay, when people are traveling, people have moved. Okay, how can we continue to grow that ministry? And then how can we think of ourselves moving into the future, not trying to get back to where we were 3 years ago, but how is God calling us forward? So, you know, and we've started a strategic planning process. You know, in January, it'll be my fifth anniversary here. So we've gone through one cycle of strategic planning, and, you know, everything from the modern service to our community group initiatives to our mission outreach. I mean, we've really achieved some great things in the midst of some really difficult circumstances. So now, where's the next stage in God is calling us? I think we can grow as a teaching church. And by teaching church, I mean, how can we help people discern and recognize their gifts for ministry, train them up and send them out to do the work of ministry? How can we continue to connect people. I think one of the things I see for us, and we're going to get more of this in early 2022, is how can we find our primary identity in Jesus Christ and not in our, in so many other things that try to define us. I think our culture has just gotten so bifurcated, and there's so much dissension. Like, how can we create an authentic community where we find our identity in Jesus Christ, and we find that as our fundamental identity, and that helps define who we are. And I think that that's something that the church is really needs to learn. And I think, we've seen the rate of loneliness, I think since 1985 has gone up by like 25%. And I think the pandemic has only exacerbated that. How can we do ministry with people who are lonely? And often we know that loneliness is often self-defeating, because as I feel lonelier, it becomes more difficult for me to get out and make connections with people. And we have a lot of fake friends, online, but not making authentic, real connections. So I think we can really grow in that way as well. I was just so thrilled. You mentioned the Glory of Christmas concert. I'll let people know it's already on the church website. You can go check it out if you missed it or you want to watch it again. It was fantastic. And how can we create, I think in our culture, it's so secularized. And by that, I mean, there's very, very rarely do we have moments of transcendence or moments of beauty that just kind of move us to tears or give us a sense of awe. How can the church create those moments where people have an encounter with the God of the universe, where everything stands still, and I don't care about what I'm doing on social media, what the news is, my problems are. It's just a transcendent experience, and I think that we really need to cultivate moments like that for people, because in our world, I think it's really hard to experience those. Well,
yeah. When we are able to cultivate those, and it allows us to really experience the four themes of Advent in a true way, love, joy, peace, just recognize those things. Again, it's not something that I'm stirring up within myself or it's contrived in any way, but it's the actual presence of God, something that's, bigger than me, that allows me to rest in the knowledge that those things are real and valid. Yeah.
Dan, I'd be interested. So you've been on staff for how long now? 8 months?
Almost. It'll be a year on January the 3rd.
Wow. Okay. So you've been around long enough to kind of, I think, get the ethos of RPC and kind of, I want to ask that question to you. When you think about the future of RPC, where do you see our great opportunities for ministry and growth?
So yesterday at the Glory of Christmas, Cindy and I were sitting there. Two things happened. One, the very first communal song, the carol that was sung, I looked at her and she's wiping tears at her eyes. And this is, again, we've never worshiped at RPC before, but again, it's a full church and it's beautiful music. And then I look across and I see some of our elders. They didn't know that I could see them, exact same thing. So there was this transcendent experience. And I don't know if it's because coming out of the pandemic and we just hadn't experienced anything, or it's just the presence of God was evident. And so it was all part of that. So I'm with you in recognizing that. But at the same time, there's a family who I'd never met before. And there's a whole lot of people in that service that I don't know. I've never seen. There's a family that got 3 kids, probably like the boys probably 8, the girls probably 4 or 5, and then have another little boy that's 2 or 3. And for that entire hour, mom and dad were just battling these kids, just trying to keep them, and I know that they're embarrassed, and we're sitting immediately behind them. It doesn't faze me at all. I had 4 of the critters, so I get it. That it doesn't. But I asked the kids afterwards. I said, "Oh, what'd you think of that music?" And they all just went, "Ugh." They weren't very excited about it, and mom and dad were just, I could tell that they were frustrated, and mom and dad apologized. And I said, there is no need to apologize. You're doing great. You know, you're bringing your kids in to have this experience. These are going to be things that you're going to look back on as traditions. They're going to ask you, when are we going? Because it's something that's meaningful. And I think if we continue to generate and become a community that is absolutely accommodating and accepting of people and all their brokenness and all, you know, misbehaving kids at times and all that kind of stuff, and saying, you're part of this community. We don't expect perfection. We don't expect everything to go exactly as we have planned it. We know that God is in the midst of this. And if we can do that, I think this community will continue to thrive. I'm sure it's possible. I don't know. I don't know everyone at RPC. There might have been some people that they've been sitting in our place. It would have ruined the whole thing for them. I hope not, because I think that's the kind of family that I want to put them at ease as much as possible, to say, you belong here. Like we've had kids. We know they're not perfect. It's okay. You know, it's going to get more difficult before it gets better. You know, I'm just at the, it's going to get better bit. Like, whew, we got him out of the house. Thank goodness. I wasn't sure that was going to happen. It's touch and go there for a while.
4 of them. Yeah, you have 4 of them.
Yeah, and you're about to start. I'm wondering, you know, early 2022, if sleep deprived Jeff is going to like have the same punch in his sermons. I just don't know. We're going to find out. You know.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, well, we are. You know, it was funny. I just feel like I'm in my early 40s, right? And so I'm like kind of an old dad, you know, I think, and I just don't feel old. I was talking to a couple young people that were at church there. I think I asked them she said they were 25. And I said, and then I was talking about somebody else. I said, oh, this other guy, he's like our age. And they'd look at me, they just go, huh? And I was like, oh, we're not the same, man. We're not in the same generation. I feel 25, man, but I'm not.
No. I mean, you're not right up there with David Letterman. You're not that old as a father, but you know.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, man. So that was awesome. That was awesome last night.
Yeah. And
I really hope that, you know, I think Christmas Eve is going to be a really meaningful time as people come back to in-person worship. And we're trying to really, and, you know, past 2 years, we've tried to like carry a delicate balance of people's comfortability of coming back, and people are like gung-ho ready to go, and other people very hesitant.
Yeah.
And so we want to be sensitive to both kind of groups of folks and where they're at. You know, because this is not my church, not your church. This is Christ's church. And we're just lucky to be here. And so we want to be as faithful as we can and good stewards, you know, of the ministry that we're called to.
Yep. That's true. I'm excited. 2022 is going to be good. We don't know what kind of good, but it's going to be good.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
You hate to predict anything these days, because it's just like, well, and, you know, and I haven't done a thorough, you know, kind of accounting of the last 2 years. Emotionally, I'm just not ready to like kind of go down that road yet. But at some point, I'm going to go through my emails and kind of recount, you know, because it's been really rough for a lot of folks. And so
for sure. I mean, he talked to Randy and Julie, and we've lost more members than ever, but you know, through death and that kind of stuff. And there's been a lot of loss and a lot of sorrow. But again, in the midst of that, as you reminded us again yesterday, and Lindsay reminded us, you know, the week before, like God is still present. There is still a peace that passes understanding, that God's love is unfailing.
Yeah. Although it is funny, I have a friend who's like contemplative. So he's got a robust meditation practice, and like he'll sit and like stare at a wall for like an hour and contemplate like the meaning of life and the universe. And he's a federal prosecutor. And I was talking to him the other day, and he's been doing everything via Zoom. And he said, yeah, man. He said, the past 2 years have been awesome for me. I've just loved it. I don't have to leave my house. He said, my meditation practice is just fantastic. And I was like, oh, must be nice, man. Must be nice to be an introvert and contemplative.
Well, we're 30 minutes in, Jeff. Is there anything else you want us to hit on, or anything you wanted to share that you didn't get off your chest yesterday in your sermon? Any updates on the owl last night?
No, I don't have any more owl content yet. I don't want to say, you're not going to get any more because, you just never know. But we'll see. But
that illustration, that's the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, didn't you say it was the greatest number of responses to that story than any sermon you preached?
One of them, yeah. I think I'm really looking forward to this Sunday and talking about joy and what are the distinctive characteristics of Christian joy. C.S. Lewis, it's the title of his autobiography, Surprised by Joy. And so I'm interested in how is joy maybe different than happiness? How is joy different than enthusiasm? Where does it overlap? And how does Christmas and Advent, tap in or illuminate what the meaning of joy is? And so I think I've met very few people that have said, I've just got too much joy in my life. I've got just too much joy. No, we all want more joy. We all could use more joy, especially during this season. So I look forward to exploring that this Sunday.
Great. All right.
Well, all right, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll be in church on Sunday. You don't want to miss that. And then again next Monday from noon to 12:30, we'll have our pastor talk back time. Take care and stay safe.
See you, everybody.